Greetings. Welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing abrupt climate change. And as always, there's lots to cover. I wanted to start with this. Imogen posted a little bit snippet of this in the comment section. This is from a blog called Deep Cold. Interior and Northern West Alaska Weather and Climate. An Alaskan Weather and Climate blog. All Science, No Politics, contributions by Richard James and Rick Thoman. I've never seen this blog, so thank you, Imogen. This is from Monday, October 1st. Alaska mega ridge persists. October has arrived, but you wouldn't know it based on the weather conditions across Alaska, as most of the state continues to be gripped by a most extraordinary spell of warm, dry, and clear weather. The culprit is another intense ridge of high pressure aloft, very similar to the one that set up over the Bering Sea in the first half of September. Here's the 500 millibar chart from Saturday afternoon, exactly 3 weeks after the chart that I showed in my mid-September post. Click to enlarge. Note that the 500 millibar height at Fairbanks was 5,800 meters, which is the latest in the year that such high pressure has been observed at this mid-atmospheric level above Fairbanks. Rick Thoman has pointed out some of the impacts of the unusual weather pattern in his Twitter feed embedded at right. This includes a number of significant high temperature records, such as 71 Fahrenheit yesterday at King Salmon, the warmest on record for so late in the season. That's incredible, 71 Fahrenheit. Again, there are many places in North America that are probably 71, a high of 71 right now. And so again, the Arctic and the northern climes are not much colder than the southern ones now these days, right? It's also interesting to note that downsloping to the southeast of the ridge has produced some remarkable warmth in southeast Alaska, including 66 degrees Fahrenheit with clear skies for 3 days in a row in Yakutat. Also the warmest on record this late in the season. According to the long-term history, this is the very wettest time of year in Yakutat, with about 0.7 inches of rain per day on average. It doesn't usually look like this. And there's a picture of very, very not cloudy skies and no rain at all. It looks very still. Here's a really stunning photo from the Suomi Polar Orbiter shortly after noon yesterday. There's a link below. The image takes you to a larger file, 2 megabyte size. What a view. So very clear, yes, in Alaska. The only real low elevation snow cover is across the eastern north slope. Although there is a bit of snow on the ground near the Porcupine River to the northeast of Fort Yukon. Yeah, it's very, well, brown. Here's the view at Yukvik yesterday evening. Yay. Showing some patchy snow on the ground. And a bit of ice on the freshwater lagoon, but no sea ice. More on the sea ice situation in another post. And for good measure, here's another selection of lovely webcam shots from yesterday. Yesterday evening. Perusing these is, for me, the next best thing to being there. It's hard to imagine that freeze up and snow cover are only a few weeks away at most, assuming that the normal seasonal trajectory soon reasserts itself. Yep. Lots and lots of pictures of very clear skies, extremely clear skies, not a cloud in the sky, clear skies. And that's it for that. Moving on to a couple of articles, one from RT. This is from October 2nd by Ken Livingston. Climate change threatens extinction, but politicians only care about next election. Our top-level politicians should make tackling climate change their utmost priority before it's too late. Well, yes, hear, hear. Okay. This cat's running around the yard, and this dog is absolutely losing his mind. Calm down there, Chesapeake. He referred to the number of people killed in Kerala. Whoops, let's go back. They're only distantly removed from the lives of citizens and care only about winning the next election. UN Chief Antonio Guterres recently warned that we face a direct existential threat if we do not rapidly switch from fossil fuels by 2020. A failure to do so will mean runaway climate change. And he has deplored the lack of global leadership by politicians to address the issue. We need to put the brake on deadly greenhouse gas emissions and drive climate action, he said, pointing out that all around the world we are experiencing record-breaking temperatures, extreme heat waves, storms, floods, and wildfires, which are leaving a trail of death and devastation. He referred to the number of people killed in Kerala, India, after the worst monsoon flooding in recent history. He also mentioned that the 3,000 people killed by Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico last year, and wildfires on such a scale that they were sending ash around the world. Even more devastating for people living on small islands or on the coastline is the rapidly disappearing Arctic sea ice. Gutierrez said that the scientists have warned us about global warming for decades, but far too many leaders have refused to listen. Far too have acted with the vision that science demands. And I find it impossible to believe that anyone like President Trump can be a climate change denier. He only is on the outside. I have lived all my life in the city of London and remember in the late 1950s and 1940s and 1950s, every winter we had snowfalls, some that lasted on the ground for weeks. Most of our summers were mild and often quite wet. About once a decade, we had a really hot summer when the papers would have headlines screaming that the temperature had risen to 85 degrees Fahrenheit, around 30 degrees Celsius. Now in the same city, we've had two very brief snowfalls in the last 20 years, and every summer is wonderfully hot with temperatures rising into the 90s Fahrenheit. But it's not just the change I've lived with in London back in the 1960s. Once or twice a year, television news would report some major hurricane or flood, but violent weather has got so much worse that we are now seeing these incidents 2 or 3 times a month. In 2007, I met Dr. Rajendra Pachari, who was a chair of the International Panel on Climate Change, and we were discussing Lord Stern's predictions that we have barely a decade before global warming passes a catastrophic tipping point. Rajendra told me that he feared we may have already passed it, and at best had only a few years to avoid it. The dangers of global warming are mentioned in the final version of a vital report due to be discussed at an international meeting later this month. But some of the scientists working on it have publicly said that its warnings about climate change have been toned down in order to make the publication more acceptable to countries like the US and Saudi Arabia, who are reluctant to cut emissions. Bob Ward, policy director at the Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change and the Environment, said, downplaying the worst impacts of climate change has led to the authors omitting crucial information about the summary for policymakers. Where have we heard this before? He went on to say, if governments do not recognize the scale and urgency of the risks, they may underestimate how critical it is to meet the goal of the Paris Agreement on climate change, and that could have very serious effects in the battle to limit the impact of global warming. The report was commissioned by governments following the UN meeting in Paris in 2015, when it was agreed to take action to limit the increase in global temperature to less than 2 degrees centigrade, and if possible, try and keep the rise to just 1.5 centigrade. The meeting that is currently taking place in South Korea will make clear that a rise of 2 degrees will be devastating, including sea level rise, a spread of deserts, a loss of natural habitats, and wildfire, rapidly melting ice caps, and an increase in the number of devastating storms. Given the seriousness of this, it is outrageous that the final draft of the report has seen the deletion of the warning that any increase of around 1.5 centigrade will lead to a large increase in migration and conflict. Well, you don't want to scare the children. The warning that the children being adults, the warning that the disruption of the Gulf Stream could have, particularly on Europe, has been dropped, along with the prediction that the ice cap melting could see a 2-meter increase in sea level in just 2 centuries. Other deletions have included the analysis that poverty and disadvantage have increased with recent warming about 1 degree centigrade. How long are we going to stay with that? And are expected to increase in many populations as average temperatures increase from 1 degree centigrade to 1.5 and beyond. I'm wondering also how long they're going to keep saying it's 1 degree above Celsius. Like, how long are they going to keep that story going? At what point are they going to have to change? Because we're not supposed to hit 1.5, and we definitely can't hit 2. So, like, I'm sure another tactic that they're using is that it's only 1. It's been only 1 for a while, and it's going to stay only 1 for the next 4 years or whatever, until things are obviously out of control, and they're going to be like, oh, well, yeah, actually, no, it's not 1 degree Celsius. We're actually at 2.3 or whatever it is. So many well-informed and well-educated climate scientists are saying that it's actually closer. We're probably at about 1.6, maybe closer to 2 than we think. Fortunately, some politicians are acting. On September 10th, Governor of California, Jerry Brown, signed into law a bill setting a 2045 deadline for the state's complete transition to renewable and other zero-carbon electricity. 2045 it's not that far off, but as quickly as things are progressing, it's pretty far away. We need to transition to zero-carbon electricity by 2022. If we're going to even have any kind of chance, and that won't really do it. Back in August 19th, 19 cities, including Tokyo and Paris, agreed to make all new buildings carbon neutral from 2030, and to retrofit existing buildings to the same standards by 2050. London Mayor Sadiq Khan has set to the target to make London zero carbon by 2050. I hope he makes it. Yet Donald Trump's administration is continuing to undermine the Paris deal, and the president has made clear that America will withdraw from it when the rules allow him to do so in 2020. His staff continue to disrupt other politicians who are trying to achieve the Paris goals to reduce carbon emissions. Trump's administration is also trying to make it easier for energy firms to leak methane, which is infinitely more damaging than carbon emissions. This is opening us up to the danger that we could clearly hit a 3 degree centigrade increase before the end of the century. It's not just politicians who are at fault. We are all involved in what is happening. There could be an increase in population of as much as 3 billion by the end of the century. But each of us is consuming more, buying more, and wasting more across the face of the planet. We need to remember that what makes us happy in the time we have to spend with our family and our friends, not how much more we can buy only to throw it away within weeks or months. Mark Lyons, in his book, 6 Degrees, spelled out the implications of each 1 degree increase. He warned, and there's a few videos that actually take us through the steps of the 6 degrees Those are good videos to check out if you haven't yet. He warned of an increased 6 degrees will lead to the death of 95% of all life on the planet. Even with urgent measures to reduce carbon emissions, there would be a real danger that by the end of the century, the human population will have been reduced to just a few hundred million living around the poles. That would be awesome if there was actually some people. I can't see 100 million people living around the poles, but whatever. Some experts are more optimistic, saying there could be 2 billion people alive at the end of the century. That's the more optimistic projection. I'm sorry to laugh, but that's a more optimistic projection, is that only 5 billion people die in the next 80 years, which isn't particularly encouraging given that we have already over 7 billion. One country that has set a standard all nations should aspire to is China, which nearly a decade ago launched a 5-year plan towards creating a sustainable economy with renewable energy. We should now be demanding that our politicians, presidents, prime ministers, and mayors make tackling climate change the most important target of their administrations. Back in October 2005, I invited the mayors of many big cities, including Beijing, to City Hall, where we agreed to set up the C20 to represent the world's 20 largest cities, and to exchange best practice and combine our purchasing power to begin to tackle climate change. Sorry, that was a typo. Today, the C20 has become the C40, and in actual fact, over 80 cities are now cooperating to tackle these problems. One thought that occurs to me is that it's interesting that politicians making the biggest effort to tackle the crisis are mayors and governors who have to deal on a day-to-day basis with the problems in their cities and regions. Perhaps the problem with national politicians is that so many of them are distantly removed from the lives of their citizens, living in grand mansions and being ferried around the planet from conference to conference by their staff. They know that tackling climate change will be bitterly resisted by some of the most polluting firms on the planet, and too many of them are only focused on winning the next election, and know they will be out of power or even dead long before we pass the irreversible moment when climate change push our species to the brink of extinction. Very, very true words, actually. I rather enjoyed this article. I hope you did too. We are living on we're living in extremely short timelines as far as the time we have left to deal with anything on any meaningful level. And, obviously we are not looking at the big picture in any way, shape, or form, or looking at longer timelines as to what is coming our way and what it is we need to do. Obviously, none of that is happening. I'm going to read one more article. This is from the New Zealand Herald. Gwynne Dyer: we're riding to extinction, waterfall in an oil barrel. The Drake equation is gradually filling out. This is from October 1st, okay? The Drake equation is gradually filling out, and it's looking good for the existence of life, the rise of intelligence, and the likely number of civilizations elsewhere in the universe. There's even reason to hope that some high-energy technological civilizations successfully pass through the energy environment bottleneck that our own planetary civilization is now entering. But not many make it through the bottleneck without suffering major losses, and quite a lot just collapse. The Drake equation was written by American radio astronomer Frank Drake in 1961 to estimate the number of high-tech civilizations in the galaxy. It had 7 factors, but they were all empty. The first 3 factors, all uncertain in 1961, were: what is the average rate of star formation in our galaxy? How many of those stars have planets? And what proportion of those planets can potentially support life? We know the answers now, and they are encouraging. There's around 1 new star annually. Most stars have planets, and about 1 star in 5 hosts one or more planets with liquid water on the surface. That means that there are probably around 100 billion planets in this galaxy alone that can support life, but that's just a start. As Douglas Adams pointed out in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which seems to be popping up a lot in the comment section, space is big, really big. You just won't believe how vastly, hugely, mind-bogglingly big it is. The Hubble telescope has revealed about 100 billion galaxies in the universe, potentially life-supporting planets, about 10 billion trillion. What Adam Frank has done in his recent book, Light of the Stars, Alien Worlds and the Fate of the Earth, is to point out that there must therefore have been a lot of exo-civilizations. Make your assumptions about first life and then intelligence emerging on any given planet as pessimistic as you like, and there will still be a lot. Maybe not billions or even millions, but even if you assume that only one life-supporting planet in 1,000,000 trillion ever supported a civilization, there would have been 10,000 of them. All civilizations use large amounts of energy. There are fossil fuels, if your planet had a carboniferous era, or burning biomaterials if it didn't. There's hydro, wind, and tides. There's solar, geothermal, and nuclear. That's it. Using energy always produces waste, but some of these models produce far less heat, carbon dioxide, and toxic chemicals than others. So put different original mixes of these energy sources into your experimental models. Put in different planetary conditions as well, some planets closer to their suns, some further away, and run a few thousand of these models through your computer. Most of the models see runaway population growth, followed at a distance by growing pressures on the planet's environment that lower the population carrying capacity. At some point, the alarmed population switches to lower impact energy sources. There is still a steep dieback, up to 70% in the population, but then a steady state emerges and the civilization survives. In other models, the planet's people, creatures, beings, delay switching the energy sources for too long. They all switch at the end, but the laggards still don't make it. The population starts to fall, then appears to stabilize for a while, then rushes downward to extinction. It's time to ask where our own planetary civilization falls on this spectrum of possible behaviors. I don't know, but this just in, oil production is at an all-time high of 100 million barrels a day, and OPEC predicts it will reach 112 million barrels per day in the next 20 years. That's definitely the wrong direction. Gwynne Dyer is a London-based independent Canadian journalist, columnist, and military historian. Let's see. All right, maybe one more article. This is something that we're already aware of, but here is a study. This is from the channel News Asia, October 5th. That's tomorrow or today. Wind turbines contribute to climate change. From Washington, wind turbines designed as an alternative to fossil fuels still contribute to climate change due to the way they redistribute heat and moisture in the atmosphere, according to a study published Thursday. Researchers from Harvard University found that powering the entire United States with wind energy could cause a 0.45 degrees Celsius ground temperature rise in the area where the turbines were located, and a 0.24 C increase across the continental United States. Wind beats coal by any environmental measure, but that doesn't mean that its impacts are negligible, said David Keith, old David Keith, an engineering and public policy professor and senior author of the study published in Joule. By comparison, the average global temperature has risen by approximately 1 degree since the end of the 19th century. I'm just noticing that they always just go with just 1 degree. The Paris Climate Accord, meanwhile, calls upon countries to limit temperature increases to between 1.5 C and 2 C to avoid serious environmental consequences. Previous studies have also examined the impact of wind turbines on climate change. One recent study published in the journal Science concluded that covering an area of the Sahara Desert with wind turbines would affect local temperature, rainfall, and in turn vegetation. The Harvard researchers said that installing solar panels would have an impact around 10 times smaller than wind turbines for the same energy generation rate. The direct climate impacts of wind power are instant, while the benefits accumulate slowly, Keith said. If your perspective is the next 10 years, wind power actually has, in some respects, more climate impact than coal or gas. If your perspective is the next 1,000 years, then wind power is enormously cleaner than coal or gas. That is the end of that. That is the end of that article. Let's go with one more. We have a little bit more time. This is from News 24, also from today. Climate changing faster than feared, but why are we surprised? Nearly every day, peer-reviewed studies on global warming warn that deadly impacts will come sooner and hit harder than once thought. Virtually none, however, suggest that previous predictions of future heat waves, droughts, storms, floods, or rising seas were overblown. And so, as the world's nations huddle in South Korea to validate the first major UN assessment of climate science in 5 years, one might ask, have we underestimated the threat of global warming? The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report on capping the rise in Earth's surface temperatures at 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels has not been finalized, with delegates predicting the 5-day meet due to end Friday will go deep into overtime. But a new draft of the 28-page summary for policymakers obtained by AFP makes it alarmingly clear that the 2-degree ceiling, long seen as the guardrail for a climate-safe world, is no longer viable. With only 1 degree Celsius of warming so far, the planet is reeling from a crescendo of lethal and costly extreme weather events made worse by climate change. Excuse me. Things that scientists have been saying would happen further in the future are happening now. Jennifer Morgan, executive director of Greenpeace International, told AFP, "We thought we had more time, but we don't." The landmark 2015 Paris Agreement enjoins its nearly 200 signatories to hold warming to well below 2C and 1.5 degrees if possible, an aspirational goal that gave rise to the IPCC report. Short-termism. Many scientists point out that warnings of climate-addled future date back decades. The 1972 UN Conference on the Human Environment, for example, foresaw the possibility of global and catastrophic effects from a 2C jump in temperature caused by carbon dioxide emissions. Many scientists have long known that human-induced climate change could have dire consequences, said Jean-Pascal van Ypersele, a professor of climatology at Université Catholique de Louvain, and a former IPCC vice chair. Those who have underestimated the severity of climate change are mostly policymakers. Van Ypersele chalked up political inaction to short-termism, election cycles trumping long-term issues, and deliberate campaigns led by the fossil fuel industry to sow doubt about the validity of climate science. But Wolfgang Kramer, research director at the Mediterranean Institute for Biodiversity and Ecology and lead author of the IPCC report, disagreed. He disagreed. Scientists should be a bit more self-critical, he told AFP in Incheon. Over the last 15 to 20 years, we have focused mostly on the impacts of 2.5C, 3C, and even a 4C world. So when leaders ask, if we shoot for 1.5C, what will it take? We can only answer, we don't really know. Models inadequate. Indeed, the vast majority of 200-odd climate models used to generate IPCC projections in its last major report, published in 2013, presumed a 2C benchmark. Only a handful even considered a 1.5C world. And for good reason. Though loosely tethered to science, the 2C target emerged mostly from the political turmoil of the 2009 Copenhagen summit and set the research agenda for nearly a decade. Those earlier models were inadequate, said Michael Mann, director of the Earth System Science Center at Pennsylvania State University. Were they now, Michael Mann? Overly conservative. They failed to capture the full impacts of a warming planet on extreme weather events, such as those that broke out across North America, Europe, and Asia this summer, he told AFP, and are still going. The models also underestimated Arctic sea ice loss, along with the pace at which the ice sheets atop Greenland and West Antarctica, with enough frozen water to add 13 meters to sea levels, are disintegrating. These feedback effects, both a cause and an effect of global warming, are especially difficult for models to capture, Mann noted. Finally, science is inherently conservative, doubly so when it comes to the IPCC, whose credibility constantly under fire depends on never exaggerating the threat, which basically undermines all their credibility. There is a cultural tradition in science, especially climate science, to not want to be alarmist, said Peter Fromhoff, Director of Science and Policy at the Union of Concerned Scientists, a Washington-based research and advocacy group. The 2013 IPCC report, for example, chose not to include in its sea level projection the contribution of melting ice sheets, which have since emerged as the main driver. It was erring on the side of least drama, Fromhoff told AFP. Well, somebody better slap those scientists awake. You know what I'm saying? Or something. I don't know. I don't know what we need to do. I'm not sure. I really am not sure. You can't trust the media. You can't depend on scientists to tell you the truth. Yeah, you can't, you depend on very, very few people. There are very few people out there telling the truth about this. Very few credible scientists telling the truth about this. Very few climate scientists. But there are a few. And those few are, alarmist, overstating the situation. They're way off base. Oh, no. So we'll see who ends up being right. And by being right, being right about the fact that we are totally and utterly up the creek. That's all I have for you tonight. Thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. If you would like to contribute to this channel, you can do so at the links below. Until next time, peace.